So this is a encore performance of the earlier JavaScript office hours in which we use Jest to write a backbone view in a TDD style, test-driven development style. So the disclaimer is that this is not something we can currently do inside fan management today because Jest expects, basically only understands ES6 import syntax or common JS import syntax. We are currently using required.js for our dependency resolution, and that uses AMD, which Jest is not interested in supporting. That said, currently Michael and I are working towards basically getting all of our code to work under Webpack instead of required.js. And once we're there, then basically ES6 is an open door. Like you can start writing ES6 anywhere in the application and it will get transpiled. We're not there yet, but this is sort of a tease to say like, help support us in getting there because this is what's on the other side. So I've started with an empty directory, and we're going to start like a standard npm project and install all the things we need, write a backbone view, and with tests. So we'll start with npm init to create a npm package. Defaults are all fine, and then we'll install and we'll save this as a dev dependency jest, which is a test framework. This might take a second. So Jest is a test framework that it's like a test framework and test runner that Facebook built internally and then released to the world. The very convenient thing about it is that it uses for its assertions, or like basically its syntax is identical to Jasmine's. So an early version of it had Jasmine as a dependency, and all of our JavaScript tests are written in Jasmine. So they're currently rewriting it. So they're actually going to be API compatible with Jasmine, but actually have their own implementation of that, as well as additional features that they have. But it's not only the assertion library, it's also the test runner. So we have Jest. Let's also install Backbone, and let's also install jQuery. Backbone brings in underscore as its own dependency, but jQuery is an optional dependency of Backbone, so it doesn't come for free. All right, so now let's start tmux. So let's start with a test file. So we'll call this view.test.js. By default, Jest will pick up all files with a .test.js extension. Hello. How come I can't open? There you go. So just like a Jasmine test, you write describe blocks. It's what BDD, I guess, inspired, but behavior-driven development. There you go. So we'll say greeter view. So we'll do like a hello world. So this should look familiar. And then you have an it block that says greets the user.
We don't use CoffeeScript anywhere in our
We do not, no.
Is there a reason?
We are using ES6 in the React code.
Okay.
Yeah.
You get your fat arrow somewhere or the other.
So let's say, just very simply, so like is a new greeter view. So let's just pretend that the code exists, and then we'll say greeter view dot el, the elements HTML to be hello Jordan. Oops. Okay, so now if we run, so actually let's also do this. So how many of you are familiar with package.json scripts?
I've used
Do some?
Yeah.
Okay, so basically it allows you to define kind of makefile-esque aliases that get executed in the context of the node modules bin directory. So rather than having to reference node modules.bin/jest, you can just write jest. And then I like to do this TDD is jest watch. Make sense?
Mm.
So now I can do npm run TDD. It's figuring out which tests to run. It found one. Okay, so we have our first error, and that's the secret to TDD. So let's. I'm just going to write the view in the same file with the test. If we have enough time at the end, we'll move it out and to play with some other things. But so let's define our view. So we're going to say var. I'm just going to import jQuery equals require. I'm going to use common.js because I'm not doing any transpiling here, and AMD doesn't work in Jest. So we're going to use require jest for now. But eventually we'll be able to use ES6. And then var underscore equals require underscore. And is. And then we call it greeter view is a backbone.view. Okay, so we now have a new error message, which is our next step to do. So basically it's saying that the HTML of this backbone view's element is empty string. So we should change that. So let's define a render function. So we're going to say this .el.html is hello Jordan. I don't know how much TDD you've done, but the idea being write the minimal code to pass the test.
Right.
Okay, so it doesn't like that. Why not? Probably because we're not calling render.
Yeah.
So now it doesn't like it because we didn't return this. This is a convention in Backbone that you return this from render so that you can do things like this. Okay, we're green.
Oh wow, I didn't know that. You need to return this.
Yeah, just so that you can, basically for this exact pattern, that it's fairly common to instantiate and then immediately render. Cool. So you see, first of all, that like it's watching the files that this file change. It picks up all the test files and then traces their dependency graph and watches those files and only reruns the tests affected that have the file that has changed in their dependency graph. So you could be watching many hundreds of tests here, and if you change like a core library that everything, like you change Backbone itself, all your tests will rerun. But if you change like only one view, only the unit test for that view would get run. Okay, so that's good, but that's really not that useful, right? We want it to, so we'll save that, but we want something more useful. We want it to greet the user. Actually, no, let's keep the same one. So we want to greet the user specified by a model. So for example, rather than hello Jordan, this should be greeting equals. Actually, let's switch to underscore template here. So let's add a template. So we're not actually going to change the test. We're going to refactor to, rather than using a hard-coded string, deriving this from an underscore template. So this is going to be hello first name exclamation point. Let's also call template. And then here, this is going to be this.template first name Jordan. Save. Okay, something is wrong. First of all, ESLint is yelling at me, which is a good sign. I wanted a comma here, not a semicolon. It also didn't like that I'm missing parentheses, and we're green again. So we've refactored, but we know that we're still good. But now we want to actually have it come from a model. So let's say that we want let's replace this object with this.model.toJSON. Okay, so we're failing test now. So let's say we have user is a new backbone model that has a first name of Jordan. Okay, saved, still failing. So let's pass in here, our model is user. Now backbone will automatically set this.model. If you pass a model in as a option to a view, it will automatically set this.model to be that model. So our tests pass. I need another shot apparently. So that's good. Now another pattern that you often see in Backbone is you sort of subscribe to the change event of that model and re-render any time that it changes. Mm. So let's define another test that says re-renders when user name changes. So we define our view, we create a new greeter using, or we define our model, we create a new greeter with that model, but then we're going to say user.set first name is now Elizabeth. And we want this to be hello Elizabeth. Okay, so we have a failing test. This is good. So we're getting nothing, and that's because we've not rendered at all. So what we want to do is we want to listen for a change event on this user and re-render in that case. Okay. So let's go define initialize. And we're going to say this dot listen to this dot model. We're going to listen to its change event. And in that case, we're going to render. And we're green again. So that's good. So another thing that you might want to be able to test is like DOM manipulation, right? So like if I click on this button, it should change the behavior somehow. So let's create a test.
Yeah, I feel like we glossed over the part where you're like modifying a DOM here in Node, and that's like very casual without using because you're not using a headless browser, right?
Correct. So there's two things. The biggest piece is that Jest relies on JS DOM, which is a DOM implementation written in JavaScript. So it's essentially a mocked DOM. Now it's also worth noting that while we have DOM nodes, we have yet to render anything into the global DOM. So a big part of this is not only just like how to write tests in TDD, but also like how to structure a backbone model such that it doesn't leak out into the global DOM. This is something we're really not good at here, right. At least historically. We have all kinds of backbone views which like use jQuery matchers to just like reach out to the global DOM and like store state there, or like toggle a button or something like that, and that becomes very difficult to test. So a big part of this is like recognizing how to structure a backbone model.
And Jasmine doesn't allow you to do any of this. Like I'm trying to see what's the advantage of using Jest.
So most of this stuff, you could go run this test in Jasmine and it would be fine. The difference is really the tooling. So our test runner for Jasmine is something we wrote ourselves in like 2013 or something, which is like a Python script that constructs an HTML file that includes Jasmine and then like tries to pull stuff out of the console from Phantom.js. So like the error messages you get are, I would say, unhelpful. You know, if you've done enough JavaScript testing to have an opinion about that. Like you can't console.log. which is makes it incredibly difficult to do TDD when you're like, oh, it didn't work. Let me figure out why. Oops, I'm fucked. Because it's not a test runner, it's basically a Python script that does all this. To rerun a test, you have to spin up a whole new Phantom.js instance. So you're restarting your browser every time you want to run a test.
And to make things even worse, because we have so many leaks into the global DOM, we end up spinning up a browser for every app in our code base, of which there's about a dozen or more that have these Jasmine tests. So you end up
there's 100 Jasmine tests, and each one runs in its own, has to spin up a new instance of Phantom.js. So this kind of TDD fast feedback is very difficult because you can run the test, but it takes maybe 4 or 5 seconds. And there's no watcher task associated with it. It doesn't have any notion of the dependency graph. And there are also some other features. Actually, let's do that now. So here's a feature of jest which Jasmine doesn't have. So before we get into the DOM manipulation, let's just have let's start here. So maybe now we say this actually should be a title. We save that. I say, oh shoot, our test failed. But we don't really want to have each of these tests have to write out the entire template every single time. So we can do something a little bit more nuanced. We can just say we expect this to contain this string. So let's not be quite so pedantic. And again, this is just Jasmine, that's fine. Okay, but we do care about all the HTML, right? And if the HTML were to change, that might be a bug. It might be that happened by accident. So one of the features that Jest recently introduced is called snapshots. So we can say does not regress. So we create our greeter view, we have the HTML, and we're just going to say to match snapshot. Now, the very first time that runs, if there's no snapshot for it to match, so it just creates one. You can see here a snapshot summary, one snapshot written in one test suite. Okay, but now we come through and we say oh, I accidentally made that a 2. And so you commit that snapshot along with your pull request. And so not only does it, one, assert that there was no unexpected change to the output of this view, but also as part of your code review, you can say, oh, what side effect did this have? And this is actually very interesting. Very interesting.
Yeah.
JS DOM has interpreted this as a closing H1 and a closing H2. I wonder what Phantom.js would have done in that case.
Yeah, browsers have this whole set of healing things, and they're different between different browsers.
Yeah. So here,
Is there a way to blow out or update the?
Yep. Good question. So, so let's say we change this to 2, and we do want this change. So look down here at watch usage. Press U to update failing snapshots. Press P to filter by file name and regex pattern. Q to quit. Enter to run again. So we're just going to say U, and it's updated a snapshot.
In a suite, will it just stop at this one snapshot?
It will run all of the snapshots. I think you only have the option to update all snapshots or none. But you could then scope down. So this says filter by regex or file name. So if we look here, snapshots, it includes the name of the test that is run and the output. You can see that now it says H2. So that's something which Jasmine does not have. Okay, but let's get that DOM manipulation going. So let's say that we have a button here. It says exit. Let's actually do TDD. Okay, so here you can see my snapshot changed. We added this button. Oh, yeah, I see now that I actually need a space here. And yes, I want to keep that, so we're good to go. But let's say, changes the greeting when you leave. So let's say that if we do greeter view dot el, and this is just jQuery. I think you can actually do this. Button dot click. We would expect this to contain goodbye, Jordan. Okay, so in fact it contains nothing. So let's create an events hash. And we'll say that on the click of a button, we will run handle click. Okay, well that doesn't help us. So now we'll say handle click. It's going to say the function, and it's going to say this dot greeting equals goodbye, and then it's going to render. So expected string. Oh, is this the wrong order? Oh yeah. So currently we have nothing. Okay, so something is wrong here, right? Because we expected this clicking of a button to at least render. So it's setting the greeting. We're not using the greeting, which is a problem, but it is rendering. So there should be some, we should be getting this normal string here. So I think it might be that. No. Okay, so let's find out what we have here. So we do a console.log. Okay, length is 0, so it didn't find anything. Oh, that's because we haven't rendered. So it has to render before we can have a button to click on. Okay, so it's now rendering, but it's not actually taking into account this new greeting that we've defined. So inside initialize, let's say this dot greeting equals hello. And then inside here, we need to pass in some more info here. So let's say var context equals extend. And then we need to pass that context into the template. And we'll replace this with I misspelled goodbye. Goodbye. Or green. So that's pretty much all the code I wanted to cover. There's one more feature of Jest, which I think is pretty cool. So you can do npm run test coverage. Let's see. All files unknown. Let's see what we actually have here. So this not only will generate a coverage report, but it'll also generate a readable report. Okay, so for some reason it's not picking up any files, which is interesting. Oh, it's because we're all in one file. So let's view, because it's not going to include coverage of your test. So let's do greeter view.js. And then here we'll do module.exports. And here we'll do that won't work. We need / okay. I got too much stuff going on here. So let's go back into TDD mode and see what we've broken. Okay, so it doesn't like greeter view is not defined. Oh, it's 'cause somehow I didn't actually save that. Okay, so we're passing again. So now if we go back and run our code coverage, you can see we have 100% code coverage, which is good. And so we can come back here and say, oh, here's our greeter view. And you can see, like, oh, this line was run one time throughout the course of the tests because it only got imported once. But like our initialize function got run 4 times, and everything is covered. But if, for example, we maybe we had some other function here. And we go back and run our coverage. You can see, uh-oh, that never got touched in our test. So that's all I have. Any questions?
So this doesn't show us what's been covered. It's only saying what function has been called how many times, but if it's not covered, it'll highlight it in red.
Correct.
Okay.
So code that is run is not colored, but it is annotated. And code that has not been run. So it's actually kind of interesting, right? Because the handle stuff, like this definition has run, and so handle stuff is not red, but the function itself was never executed. It's a little bit, I'm not sure exactly how they decide what gets colored or not, but.
I feel like something I was expecting to see happen here was that jest would be a lot faster than the equivalent Jasmine test. But I was looking at the runtime for some of these tests, and they struck me as kind of high. Like it seems like this test suite is taking about a second to run. Am I misunderstanding that, or is that like accurate for the runtime on this?
I think the speed benefit is not so much that an actual test runs faster. For us, the biggest benefit will be like the spin up to actually get to start running the test will be a lot faster. But also it can parallelize the tests. So if you have a larger number of tests, it will run each of them in parallel. And then even, I think more important than that, as far as actual like usage, the fact that it intelligently only runs the tests that are for which the associated files have changed, that's enormous. So like, I think one common thing that happens to me is I'm working on a file and I have a test for it and I'm working on the test and I'm changing the thing and I do that and then I'm like, sweet, my test pass, it looks good in dev, and I push it, open a pull request, and it's like, oh, your test failed. It's like, oh, because some other test that I wasn't expecting to be implicated failed. So like there was some side effect of my change in some other test that I didn't think about. But of course, to run all the JavaScript tests takes like 5-10 minutes or something like that. And so I'm not going to run all of them. It's too cumbersome. But the fact that basically, one, running all of them will be faster because they can run in parallel and they don't have to spin up a new test every time. But two, I don't have to carry the mental overhead of caring which tests are implicated.
So I'm hearing that for unit tests, this is definitely an advantage, right? Like you can do the parallelization, you can zero in on the ones that matter. I also get the feeling that Jest might be able to replace Selenium as our integration test tool. I feel like I could imagine writing a test using the snapshot feature, where you cause the user to take some actions, and then snapshot, and then cause them to take some more actions, and then snapshot. However, usually integration tools like Selenium, Capybara, and things like that usually have like a higher level syntax for taking user actions. Like they'll say find link on page with text and click on it. It's a little bit easier than this, where you would probably, I guess you could actually use a CSS3 selector to actually do find link on page with text, but like
so
I just wonder if
if this had actually gotten rendered into the global DOM, so like if for example we like rather than just rendering to our local EL file, we like actually render this into the global DOM, we could use a global jQuery selector. So it's like jQuery, like $, some CSS selector, .click, and then, see something. It's certainly not what it's intended for.
You don't think so?
I don't think so. I think it's much more intended for this, where you have a scope. Because the other thing is that if you have a lot of snapshots that are very verbose, like if you have a whole page of a snapshot, then like probably every pull request is going to somehow change the output of that, or some large number, and so it's going to be very noisy. Like especially if you have like, do this, click here, get another snapshot. Do this, click here, get another snapshot. Then like you change something like the header of that page, all those snapshots are going to change.
That's true, and your test would need to actually instantiate the entire page as well with its whole structure, and the structure of the page is loaded from the server. So,
So just, I did this with Backbone mostly to sort of prove a point, but Jest is coming out of Facebook, definitely intended to work well with React, and there are a lot of other like things that were intended for it to work well with React. The snapshot feature, for example, does work with React components, but rather than outputting HTML, it outputs like its virtual DOM representation of that component, which is pretty much HTML, but also like notates when it has functions bound to things, which is pretty cool.
Where do we stand with React as a company? Like, are we using React in some places?
Yeah, we're using it in some places, but sort of in like ghettos. Because
ads is not the
basically the portions of the code base that are managed that need to be transpiled don't play well with the other pieces for the same reason of like AMD syntax. Actually, Jason and I were just talking about this, and so those code bases are sort of self-contained right now, and they can't like depend upon shared libraries very easily.
It's maybe not as weak as you may make it sound though. Like one of our most prominent applications right now is the Mail Publisher, which is a very sophisticated application where you can like send mass emails and a really rich user interface. Probably one of the more complicated things that we support, and that whole user interface is done in React. And there's some important parts of the ads code base. And in fact, Caroline is working on a project to create a new page, which is a React-based page as well. So.
Yeah, but Michael and I are working full-time on, so like I'm newly in this role of doing just like JavaScript infrastructure stuff, and this is our top priority right now, is getting us moved over to Webpack so that we can unlock a lot of these things. And so part of the feedback I've gotten from my managers is that I could be doing more evangelism. So this is part of that evangelism. So consider yourself evangelized. This is now the benediction. Go forth
High five them.
and go forth and tell your manager that these things are important and that we should invest in them. Oh, hi, Jason. Yeah, so that's where we stand. It's the same thing that's blocking, like using React everywhere. Is again that like transpilation is not the norm yet.
Yeah.
We need to get there.
Is there anything stopping us from using this with our React code?
No, this would be good feedback to get. I'm currently hesitant to support two different like test scenarios in parallel, especially given that we don't like. So theoretically, right, Jest and Jasmine are API compatible. Also, like we're on an old version of Jasmine, and like so it may be that it's like actually a fair amount of work to get us to Jest full time. And so not knowing how long that window would be where we would need to support both, I'm hesitant to introduce two in parallel. But I would be open to feedback as to how other people feel about that.
I mean, if we do decide to switch this, at some point there will either be like a full switchover or a transitional period.
Yeah.
So if you were going to do a full switchover, if it is like so API compatible that it just like fully switches.
I'm guessing it's not because like we're currently not even in a place where we can upgrade Jasmine. But mostly that's because of our test runner, which is so bespoke.
And we would need to switch to CommonJS as well. I feel like, is there not like an auto?
Yeah, there is. So in fact, what we may do in the interim, so we would need to switch to CommonJS. What we might do is for the shared libraries during that like transitionary period, we might switch them to UMD, which is like more boilerplate, but would basically allow them to still work in required.js. I mean, theoretically, we could just convert everything to UMD, but it's heavy. It's like a lot of gross boilerplate. I don't know. You guys familiar with UMD?
No.
So
it's where you like declare it at the top of your require file.
Yeah.
And you put in like this type of syntax.
So there's so you have, I guess it's not as noisy as I thought it was. Oh no, this is just doing define. We need Glimo? It's not here. Enough there? Yeah, so this is, it would be something like this, where it's an anonymous function which gets imported some define function and calls define, but in actuality, like if it's in a required.js land, it actually does the required.js define, but if it detects like whether module.exports is actually a thing, and then like if that's the case, then it does the CommonJS export.
So I get the feeling that you would put this in every file, but then would the build tool like React or would require or Webpack try and like reduce the amount of boilerplate, or would every single file effectively have this duplicated?
So and Michael and I just discussed this earlier today. Probably it would be like we're going to sort of approach it entry point by entry point, right? So like the ads thing is like, okay, we can convert this to Webpack, but in the meantime, like the files that could then convert all of those to CommonJS or ES6 at that point, because they're all that's coming through Webpack, but its dependencies would need to still be able to work in React land, and so, whereas I guess it's actually more of a Jest thing than a Webpack thing, but so like it would be the high level things which are not dependent upon by many other things, or like our scoped like one page uses these end components, So those things could all just go like a chunk at a time, and they could be required. They could be AMD until they just got converted to ES6. But the like utility libraries and things, I think might need to have this syntax during that transitionary period, because they would need to service both the old code that was using them, which would need them to work as a AMD, and then the new code, which would need them to work as some kind of node import syntax. Cool.
Cool.
Thank you guys for
Thanks for
sticking around.
Yeah, that's cool.